It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. And we've got another hero of mine. This is a real coup for me. I love having this guy on the show, that's for sure. It's Ron Placone. And I'm hoping everybody's had a chance to check out his stuff. Ron Placone, he's a comedian. He can be seen regularly on the Jimmy Dore Show, also on the Young Turks. He hosts the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show, Get Your News On with Ron. He's been on Sirius XM, and he's seen on TMZ, RT, and Free Speech TV. And like I said, he's speaking truth to power, and he's a new friend of Podcast by George and a real hero. Good morning out there, Ron.
Thanks, George. I appreciate that. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I love having you on the show to talk about politics, share a little bit of your humor, promote your stuff a little bit because I'm a big fan. But I wanted to start off like we do a lot of times on this podcast with a little bit of timely news. I mentioned that you're a veteran of the Young Turks, so you know those guys. You've been on that set. You've kind of seen a little bit of their world. This Cenk Uygur thing is in the news. The background on that, he decided to run for a legislative seat out of the state of California, and now there's all kinds of crap coming out, a lot of it not very new actually, and I saw where Jimmy Dore was calling it a smear, but the stuff that I saw, Ron, looked like it was probably factual. It's just whether or not you consider it to be bad, I guess. I don't know. What do you know about that?
Well, I actually wouldn't frame it that way. First of all, like I wouldn't say it's bad or not bad. What I would say is, so first of all, just to clarify my affiliation with the Young Turks, I collaborate with the network, and I did so a lot more when Jimmy Dore's show, Aggressive Progressives, was still on the air. Since it's been off the air, I've not been there since. They just haven't really called me. So that's, the extent of my relationship. I am not an employee of the Young Turks. I never was. So basically I just, I'm willing to do panels when they ask me to, and they haven't asked me as of recent because they have a lot of folks, know. But the Cenk Uygur thing. So Cenk's whole story is that years ago, he was a right-wing guy, and he would say things that were maybe culturally insensitive, and that was just kind of what he did. He was trying to be sort of a right-wing shock jock guy, and that was who he was. Then 9/11 happened, and he saw our government's response to it, and he was kind of looking around going, what the heck are we doing? Saddam Hussein didn't do 9/11. What's going on? And he started to change. And then he became a big progressive. That's his story. I'm not inventing this stuff. That's his story. So, he had this past. He was always upfront about it. It was part of what drew people to him in the first place when he was building the Young Turks. So now people are kind of going back to that stuff, and they're saying, oh, look at this. He wrote this thing over 20 years ago. This is a big deal, and Bernie shouldn't be endorsing him. Meanwhile, simultaneously, you can't help notice Nancy Pelosi just endorsed a blatantly anti-choice Democrat.
Yeah.
And they do stuff like that all the time, and that's no big deal. But Bernie endorsed a guy who over 20 years ago wrote some, pretty weak stuff, has since retracted it, has since distanced himself for it, has apologized for it many times over, has gone on to start a huge online news network, has gone on to start Wolfpack, which is dedicated to getting money out of politics, and has gone on to, help found the Justice Democrats who are trying to infiltrate the Democratic Party with progressives. Look, I don't agree with Cenk Uygur on everything politically. We certainly have our differences. But I think the whole thing was kind of ridiculous, and this is just what happens when you run for office. This is what happens. Like they kind of dig up anything they can, and they're gonna throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And by they, I mean his opponents. And I think it was, as far as Bernie's position in it, I don't know the timeline because this all happened as of the recording of this. This all kind of started blowing up yesterday.
Yeah.
So I don't know the time. I mean, I know Cenk kind of said that, well, I don't want any endorsements. My only endorsement is to the voters. That's where my commitment is. And then Bernie said, well, to honor Cenk, I'll retract my endorsement. I don't know the exact timeline, what happened first, what happened second. I'm assuming Cenk said, I don't want any endorsements, so Bernie retracted his. I'm assuming that's the order it went in. But I don't know that to be a fact or not a fact. So that's pretty much my take on it. And the problem here is that, this is a smear. Like this is in many ways a smear job. This is in many ways that they're trying to hurt his candidacy. And what people are going to remember when it gets time for, general voters who maybe aren't, don't have their ear to the ground every day, like folks like you and I do, because we dwell in it for better or worse. We're probably not doing our blood pressures any favors, but, we dwell in this stuff. What those general voters are going to remember is, oh, yeah, Bernie retracted his endorsement of this guy because of sexism, and Nancy Pelosi endorsed the other person.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to remember, and then they're going to vote accordingly. And that's kind of the problem with our politics. So, I have my disagreements with Cenk Uygur. I have my criticisms of Cenk Uygur. But as far as stuff that he was saying over 20 years ago, when by his own admission, he was a right-wing guy who was a totally different person and learned, you're either going to let people change or you're not. And I think he has proven that he's definitely a different person and he's changed. And, it's interesting that, I think Bourgeois Alien posted this on Twitter. So I'm going to quote her here. She said, it's interesting because I love her Twitter feed, but she said, it's interesting. The same people who are not allowing Cenk Uygur to change from something he wrote over 20 years ago are the same people who are fine with Liz Warren being a Republican until she was 47.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a good point. And I don't, I can't give him a pass on a lot of that stuff because a lot of it really is not very good. But here's what I will say.
I'm not giving him a pass either. I'm just saying it's like, do you let somebody change or don't you? And, you're rehashing this stuff that has been explained many times over solely because you're just trying to smear a guy in a campaign. Like, this isn't about actual concern for sexism. Otherwise, you would know that, this guy has many times over distanced himself from this stuff.
It's a hit job. Yeah. Yeah. I looked at it and I, well, okay, this was 20 years ago. He was a struggling young blogger at that time trying to find his way, maybe making a switch from Republican right-wingism to progressivism, and he's been very successful at that, and God love him for doing it, like you mentioned. But, this was back in the Howard Stern era, and everybody's trying to create some notoriety for themselves, and they're trying to say and do outlandish things. And he did it, back then, and he's not sticking by it. He's not standing by it today. The man has changed. And Ron, I'm a big anti-violence guy. I tell people all the time, our society has gotten kind of weird where anything sexual or sexuality is taboo. It's verboten. It can't be brought up or discussed, or you can ruin people's lives and careers over sexual things, but you can turn on TVs and movies and video games and just in common parlance, people getting their brains splattered all over the walls. I mean, like in The Irishman. I mean, that's good entertainment. That's fun. That's good Americanism. But my God, don't let anybody see a boob or talk about sexuality or something like that, or their career's over, their life is finished. I just think these are odd times. And politically, what we end up, who wants a bunch of sexual eunuchs to be in charge of the world, in charge of the country? Who wants a bunch of Richard Nixons, running the world? Well, that's kind of the way that he was. I'd kind of like to have some real human beings in charge of human beings in this world that we live in. So I mean, that's kind of the way that it struck me. I don't want to spend all show talking about Cenk because I know your time's limited because you got a big show tonight with Jimmy and the gang. I wanted to talk a little bit about you to kind of set the stage here to let people know who you are. Now, you came boiling out of PA. I think you went to college out there. You're in Los Angeles now.
I did my undergrad at Indiana University in Bloomington, and then I did my master's degree back in Pittsburgh, where I'm from originally.
I see. Okay.
And I was up in Seattle for a little while, and that's where I started doing comedy, or really started doing comedy. I mean, I dabbled in it beforehand, But it wasn't until I moved out to Seattle where there was like a real comedy scene that I really dove into it. But,
And how did you find your footing out there, and how did you end up with the Jimmy Dore Show and being the notable person on the internet that you are? And just, I know it was hard work, obviously, but I mean, how's this happening for you?
That's actually what my business card says. It says notable person on the internet. That's what. No, but yeah, no. So I was. I mean, I'll start like I'll give the kind of abbreviated thing. Like basically, I got into stand up first. And I always wanted to do radio. Like I always really loved radio and talk and stuff like that, and still do. And now I'm doing it. But I started doing stand up, and I really got bit by the bug. And it took about 4 or 5 years, and there was a lot of side turns in between there. I went to graduate school at one point, and but eventually I was making a living at it, and I was what they call a road comic. And that is exactly what it sounds like. You travel all across the country doing stand-up at clubs and colleges, wherever will book you. And that's your life. And it was a pretty fun life for a while. Eventually it kind of started to get old. Now, in the meantime, I had done a couple things. And one of those things was I brought Lee Camp. I'm sure you know who that is. I brought Lee Camp in for a show, and I opened for him. And in the audience was one of the employees for the Young Turks. And they saw me, and simultaneously I was doing this audio kind of like news segment. And it was like a humorous, like it was like a 1 minute, like just kind of punchlines about the news segment that I would just record. And then I sent it off, and one of the people who picked it up thought it was funny was David Pakman of the David Pakman Show. So, and at the time, David Pakman was on the Young Turks network. So the Young Turks employee goes, "Hey, you're that guy. You do that segment on the David Pakman Show. It's really funny. I've heard it." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks." And he goes, "Why aren't you doing a video segment of that?" And I'm like, I just don't. Like, I don't have a good answer for you. I just don't. And he goes, "Well, that would be perfect for the network that we're building over at the Young Turks." And I was like, "Well, if you're offering me to be on the Young Turks network, I'll start making videos." So that's how I got involved with their network. And this was back in 2013, or it might've been 2012, but it was 2012. It was a while ago. So that's how I met Jimmy initially. When I would come out to LA, when I was on the road, occasionally I'd go out to LA for a couple of days, and I would just sort of do whatever shows the Young Turks had at that time. They used to have this show called The Point. I did that a couple times, and that was where I met Jimmy. And this was back in 2013. And a fun fact that I think Jimmy likes this story. He's asked me to tell it a few times, so I think he digs it. But when I was in college, I watched Jimmy's first special just as a college kid. I was just like in my dorm, and Jimmy's first special had dropped. This was 2004. And it was, I was really anti-Bush. Still am, as a matter of fact. He's just not in office anymore. Yeah. But I was really anti-Bush. And so I really liked Jimmy's first special because he talked about politics a lot. He talked about Bush a lot. So I watched it. And, so when I met him all these years later, I knew who he was. At the time I watched his special, I wasn't doing comedy. I didn't know I would ever do comedy. It was just, I just watched a comedy special for entertainment. But yeah, I met him and I was like, "Hey man, I watched your first special in college. I know who you are. You're Jimmy Dore, blah, blah, blah." And we just sort of kept in touch over the years. And then I kind of got tired of being on the road and decided it was time to go out to LA. And, it's funny. I was thinking about this morning, like, a lot of times, like, the cliche about Los Angeles is like, "Oh, you're going to seek fame and glory. You're going to go try to be famous." For me, like, when I went out there, it was almost the opposite. I kind of felt like I'm not going to be in the spotlight anymore, because the truth about Los Angeles or New York is that if you want to work in entertainment in some capacity, that's just typically where the jobs are. I mean, you can have a career in comedy and live anywhere you want, but, a lot of what's going on is in those two places. Not everything. There's a lot going on other places too. I'm not trying to, I don't want to get hate emails from people in Atlanta or Chicago or whatever, but but those are still the capitals, right? So I thought I want to get off the road and I want to try to get a writing job. So in my mind, I was actually going to be out of the spotlight. Like I was like, okay, because when you're a road comic, you're on stage every night. Nobody's heard of you typically, but you're on stage every night and, you have a chance to try to build a following that way too. So I thought I was going to give all that up and just be at a desk writing on staff somewhere. And I was ready to do it. But I get to LA and I start looking up things. I'm like, what's going on in town? What's happening? I should just be going out and meeting whoever I can meet. I was doing a lot of colleges at the time, like performing at colleges. So that was basically how I was making my living. And then I did like some odd jobs to kind of make ends meet because I wasn't on the road anymore. So the way I used to make my living was just non-existent anymore. So I would, fly out for some college gigs and then I'd come back and I would like walk dogs or whatever else and just go out at night and try to meet people and try to network, just a very typical LA story. One weekend I looked at who was headlining at all the comedy clubs in town and I saw that Jimmy was headlining and I was like, I should go say hello to him. I haven't seen him in a couple years. I haven't emailed with him in a couple years. But, he should remember me. And so I went and I said hi to him after the show. I waited till the show was over. And I noticed he was starting to I noticed things were starting to bubble for him. Like I could just tell, like there was just a bit of an electricity in the room. And I was like, wow, this guy, the show's really going good for this guy. And, so I said, hey, Jimmy, I'm glad to see the show's really taken off. And, I'm Ron Placone. We met at that. And he's like, oh, yeah, I remember you. And he goes, aren't you like out in Oklahoma or something? And cause at the time I was living in Nashville, Tennessee. He's like, aren't you in like Oklahoma or something? And I was just like, well, no, I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, but I live here now. And he's like, that's probably a good move. And then he's like, then he was just like, keep in touch. And then he got in the car with Steph, who waved and said, hi, I'm Steph. And I was like, hi, I'm Ron. And that was it. But, I kept in touch like he told me to. And eventually he was like, hey man, I need a panelist. Can you come in? Here's where my studio's at. So I did. And then he asked me back and then he kept asking me back and it started going well. And then he kind of liked what I was doing. So he gave me a chance to write for him some. I started doing that and that went well too. And then it just morphed into what it is today. And the show kept on growing and I got to kind of jump in and, participate and I was along for the ride and I grew with it.
And it is growing. I mean, it is exploding, this YouTube phenomenon. And Joe Rogan, of course, is at the top of the pack. Jimmy Dore is not far behind, and you're a part of this. I don't know if you saw this or not, but Yang was just up at Iowa State University speaking to a big crowd here this week. And he asked people if they had seen his commercials. No, nobody had seen his commercials. They all had seen him or heard him on Rogan's show.
I like that. I mean, I like that a lot.
that was really something. Well, you're my kind of guy. I mean, you're a progressive, you're a rock and roll guy, you're a cat guy. We've got that in common.
All the boxes.
Yeah, exactly. And you're a radio guy, and that was my background. Matter of fact, in your show, you've got a joke about radio, which really struck home to me about it being a dead or dying industry or whatever. That's why I got out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but in that joke, I also say I will go down with the ship.
Yeah.
So it's poking fun at radio, but it's also poking fun at myself, and really showing a lot of love for radio.
And you like the music, and some of these folks don't. I kind of listen or watch Jimmy. I mean, he's kind of tuned into it, but not very much. You're a rock and roll guy. You like the Hold Steady. I mean, that band out of Minneapolis that I like. I mean, those guys are great.
Yeah. I love the Hold Steady. I'll have to send you. I interviewed Craig a couple years ago. I used to have when I lived in Nashville for a little while, we had a lefty morning show. Speaking of radio, we had a little lefty morning show, and I would go on the road on the weekends, and I was trying to build this show up. It never took off. But we had some pretty cool segments, and we got to interview some really cool people. And yeah, one of them was I got to interview Craig from the Hold Steady. And we talked for a while, and it was a really cool chat. And it was right when he was starting to do more solo stuff. Cause his solo stuff's great too, if you haven't checked that out. But yeah, they're a fantastic group, man. I mean, and then I've interviewed Franz, the keyboardist for the Hold Steady, on Get Your News On with Ron. I've had Franz on that show, and he's an incredibly interesting guy. If you haven't, I really recommend reading his book. It's called The Humorless Ladies at Border Patrol, and it's a music journal, but it's also, a lot of geopolitics are in there, a lot of like history is in there, because he's a crazy intelligent dude, and it's like 350 pages, but it's such a cool read. And so I interviewed him about his book, and then I also asked him, because there was like speculation over whether or not he was back in the band, because like he had left for a little bit, and I just straight up asked him, I was just like, dude, as a huge Hold Steady fan, you are very missed. Something is definitely missing. You have been on a couple shows. What can we expect? And he just goes, I'm back in the band. And I was just so like, like there was just a moment of bliss on my face. And I was just like, oh, great. And I was like, so that's it? And he's like, yeah, dude, I'm in the band. I was like, awesome.
My God. So we're going to lose you here because you got to go on and do other things today. And I'm limited here in the length of the podcast also. But before we do, if you had to pick one thing that's kind of top of mind with you right now that you like to talk about, or that and I know you've talked about net neutrality, you've talked about crazy Biden and his hairy legs. I know you've talked about the news blackout with Bernie, and of course we all love Tulsi, myself included, and I'm so pissed off at the way that she's treated with the media. You saw the WAPO article about 3 decades of lying to the American people about Afghanistan. We have one candidate out there that's talking about Afghanistan. She doesn't even get interviewed about it, doesn't even get coverage.
Yeah.
What's top of mind with you right now?
Well, I mean, first, as far as 2020 goes, I'm hoping for a Bernie Tulsi ticket. I think that's the strongest ticket we can hope for, and I think that it would beat Trump. Because honestly, I don't see anybody else beating Trump, really. I don't think Liz Warren would beat him. I mean, come on, Joe Biden. You think Joe Biden would beat Trump? I don't think Pete Buttigieg would beat Trump. I just don't think anyone else would beat Trump. It's not just that I don't really like any of those other candidates. I mean, I'm not a fan. But I don't think they'd beat Trump anyway, so it doesn't matter even if I was. But anyway, municipal broadband and net neutrality is a big thing to me, and the reason for that is because, in municipal broadband, just to give a quick crash course, for anyone that might not have heard of this, because it's not, I mean, when you say these words, I mean, municipal broadband, net neutrality, oh boy, the panties drop, right? I mean, these aren't the sexiest words in the world. These are not the sexiest concepts in the world. But here's the thing, George, they're incredibly, incredibly important, because this is the future of the internet. Like, look, we have all these problems, as you mentioned. I mean, we have endless wars. We have a climate catastrophe approaching. We have healthcare going on where people don't have healthcare. We have a wage discrepancy that's remnant of ancient Egypt. We have college and higher education becoming a privilege for the elite and nobody else. We're in a very kind of catastrophic time where we need a sharp turn without a solid communication vehicle, which in our day and age is the internet. How are we going to begin solving these problems? Because we can't rely on the corporate media. All the stuff I just mentioned, they don't even talk about, or they try to marginalize it or trivialize it and make it out like it's not a big deal. So we need a free and open internet to kind of get messages out there and to just have a pseudo-democratic society. And now that we've lost net neutrality, which net neutrality is just the policy that treats the internet like a utility and treats all internet traffic equally. Now that we've lost that, which we've had it since the advent of the internet. People like to pretend that we didn't have it until 2015. That's not true. We had net neutrality laws and they were being followed. They just weren't official on the books. So in 2015, we got it officially on the books because the cable companies decided they didn't want to follow it anymore. So in reality, we've not really known a post-net neutrality internet. And a post-net neutrality internet would look a lot different than the internet as we know it now. Basically, everything would be the subscription-based services, and nothing else would be able to load or exist. Stuff like this wouldn't exist anymore. Stuff like the shows you've come to know and love on YouTube wouldn't exist anymore. So what municipal broadband does, it takes the internet out of the hands of the cable companies, puts it into the hands of cities and municipalities. There was a Harvard study done recently that actually Bernie Sanders' campaign mentions, because Bernie is to my knowledge, Bernie's the only candidate that has a plan for universal broadband, which is what we're talking about here. What it does is, it puts the internet into the hands of cities and municipalities. Harvard has done a study that Bernie Sanders cites that has indicated whenever a city does this, you get, first of all, better internet. It's way faster. And it comes at a cheaper price. So it's been a benefit to every community that's done it. And I know some people are thinking, nothing makes me happier than calling Comcast customer service. Yeah. Are you going to deny me that privilege? I look forward to it every time. It's like a holiday came early. I mean, it's the holiday season. Okay. What I'm hoping for is that I have to call Comcast customer service.
Kill me now.
I know some people are thinking that, and what I'm saying to them is, I'm like, you know what? I know it's going to be tough to let that go, but why don't you give this new way a chance? Give it a chance. See what you think, and look up something. A little town called Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga, Tennessee. A lot of people don't know this, but some people are starting to find out. They have the fastest internet in the world. Pretty, or among the fastest. I don't know if it's like the fastest, but it's among the fastest internet in the world. On average, they pay about $68 a month for it. That's what they pay for their internet, and it's the fastest in the world. Some of the fastest in the world. That's less than what I pay, and I get a speed that's about half as theirs. And I have a business account. I'm getting about half of what they get. And Harvard has done this study where they looked at municipal broadband projects all over the country. In pretty much every situation, the city-owned broadband was as fast, if not faster, as what the for-profit cable was offering. And in every situation, it was cheaper. So, this is how we preserve the free and open internet indefinitely. This is how we end this battle once and for all. And we make sure that we don't have a future where we're telling our kids and our grandchildren what the internet used to be like. And they can't imagine it because they're like, oh, really? Anybody could just post something? Yeah, it was really cool. Like anyone could just post something. They tell us, generations before us tell us what radio used to be like, so it could very well happen. And the way it works, once you lose a medium, you don't get it back. So, in fact, an analogy I like to make that, you would probably appreciate and I appreciate, and I think, 10 other people in the world probably appreciate is I think in many ways net neutrality is the Telecom Act of 1996 of our generation.
Yeah.
The Telecom Act was the act that gutted radio and completely homogenized it and handed it over to corporations. Thanks, Bill Clinton.
Yes.
I think in many ways net neutrality is, it's not like a perfect, total it doesn't link up totally, right? But in many ways, it is our Telecommunications Act of 1996.
We talk about that on the show all the time because I was in radio and broadcast news back in the 80s, and the fairness doctrine was in play, which at least made you make an attempt to go out and get the other side of the story as a reporter, because if you didn't, they could yank your station's FCC license. So the owners, the managers, wanted you to do that. There was an onus to get that done. Well, the Telecom Act came along with Clinton, and Gingrich, I think, had something to do with that too, gutted the industry and put all of those programs in the hands of, half a dozen media companies, and of course made Rush Limbaugh heard and seen in every household in America, basically, because those corporations that owned those media outlets were big fans of the right. They were Chamber of Commerce, right-wing Republican ownership. And that started it all, and it gave rise to Fox News and brought us to where we're at. And now if we lose internet, as you pointed out, we'll lose Jimmy Dore and Ron Placone and Joe Rogan and all of these great programs and shows that we like. And Kim Iverson. Now I'm just going to leave you with this, and this is a little something you can put a bee in your bonnet maybe for the crew tonight. You might want to bring up with them. But maybe, I don't know if you saw her clip here a week or so ago, but this isn't new, but she brought it out very well, that in every Iowa caucus and New Hampshire primary since 1976, going back to Jimmy Carter, the person that has won either Iowa or New Hampshire for both parties has gone on to get the nomination. That's how important these Iowa caucuses are. With the exception of 1992, when we had a favorite son, our own Senator Tom Harkin was running for president, and that threw off the Iowa caucus. But if you're going to be the nominee of your party, now that's not to say you're going to win the general election, but to be the nominee of your party since 1976, you have to win either Iowa or New Hampshire. And right now, in the polls, if they're to be believed, and God, who knows, Pete Buttigieg is leading here in the state of Iowa, running up to the Iowa caucuses, and Bernie looks like, again, he'll be the winner as he was in 2016 in New Hampshire. And as you know, the great fear that everybody would have is Buttigieg can't beat Trump. You already said that. And the DNC
he
won't support Bernie. They won't allow it. They'll sink his battleship just like they did before. And so what does that lead to? That leads to Trump 2020.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're going to try to do everything they can to sabotage Bernie. We know that. I mean, they already have. I mean, now they're, they saw how well the anti-Semitism smears worked against Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. So now they're trying to duplicate that here. They're already trying that against Bernie Sanders. By the way, he's Jewish. And then they're trying that against Bernie Sanders. They're trying, like I just picture it's like, all right, stenographers, line up. The anti-Semitism thing worked great in the UK. We have to do it in the US. And then someone raised their hand. They're like, yeah, but Bernie's Jewish. They're like, the Emperor Comcast has spoken. You cannot resist.
Yeah, and they haven't begun to smear him with the hammer and sickle of the socialist Russian part. My God, that hasn't even begun yet.
Well, that's because they know that's not working as great anymore.
Yeah, good.
They know that's not working as great anymore. People are finally seeing through that. With the rise of the DSA and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people are finally seeing through that. That's why, Bernie Sanders can go on a Fox News town hall. And even after they're like, do you really want this socialist Medicare for all system? People at a Fox News town hall say yes. Yeah. And they stand up and applaud. Or Fox News publishes a poll and 73% of people want Medicare for all. People are finally seeing through that. That's why they have to get something else to attack Bernie on, and they're going to throw everything they can at it. I mean, we just have to hope that that we're so loud that they can't cheat again, basically.
And what about Chaos Agent 11? He's still out there.
Oh, he's out there, man. He's doing his thing. I mean, I let him go on Get Your News On with Ron, and he has a lot of things to say. So I appreciate what he's about. I think he's a little extreme in the lengths he'll go to. I mean, infiltrating the Biden campaign and having Biden say all those dumb things was kind of nuts, and sabotaging that Hillary poll and making it seem like people wanted her to run in 2020. That was a weird thing for him to do, but he gets a kick out of it. And you know what? When you have a beer with him, you find out he's actually a really gentle guy once you get to know him.
For folks that don't know, that's Ron's Russian alter ego. He does a great Putin impersonation, and he does his Chaos Agent 11 that just makes all the more farcical. So, all right, we're going to leave it there, pal. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Good luck tonight. Best wishes and hello to everybody that's in Ron Placone's world. And folks, check out, he's all over the country. He's all over the world. My God, you guys were just out in Australia. Are you going to Hawaii?
We were in Australia. Yeah, I'll be in Hawaii with Jimmy. That's, I'm so excited to end my year that way. It'll be really fun. Graham's going to be there. Jimmy's going to be there. Obviously, Steph's going to be there. The whole gang's going to be there. So it'll be a really fun way to spend the holiday. And then, you can check me out on, my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Ron Placone. Follow me on Twitter @Ron Placone. And 2020, we're going to be hitting the road pretty hard. I mean, as you mentioned, I don't know when this drops, but, tonight, Saturday, we have a show in Los Angeles to kind of gear up for our 2020 dates. And the cities that we have confirmed so far, February 8th will be in Tucson. 29th will be in San Francisco. March, we're going to be in Florida. We're going to be in Orlando, Miami, and we should be in Tampa as well. We're working on finalizing that. April, I'm going to be in Pittsburgh, Seattle, Portland, and then July, we're going to be in Chicago and Milwaukee but we got a bunch of dates that are in the works. And by the first quarter of 2020, we should have all those dates out there. We're going to be coming back to the East Coast. So New York City will be coming back. Boston will be coming back. Southeast, we're coming back to Atlanta, Nashville, Louisville, Kentucky. So we're going to be touring a lot, and you can get all those tickets at ronplacone.com. And if you want to see us in a city that I didn't mention, email me, ronplacone.com. Email me. We'll see what we can do, because we're going to be hitting the road pretty hard in 2020.
That's great. A huge tip of the hockey helmet to Ron Placone, and thank him for being on the show today. I mean, it's just been a thrill for me. It really has. Good luck, pal. We'll talk again soon, I hope. I'll check in once in a while. I don't want to wear out my welcome, but I would like to ring you up and check in when it warrants.
Totally, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed this.
We're going to leave it there for right now and let Ron go on his way. And right now, that's another podcast by George.